So I want to talk today a little bit about a recent white paper that we've put out from the Kenan Institute looking at immigrant entrepreneurs. So there's been a lot of talk in policy circles as well as business circles about current immigration issues and how these affect the economy. So taking a step back, look at one particular segment of immigration, and those are immigrants that come and end up starting new businesses, or immigrant entrepreneurs. So we know that entrepreneurship is very important for economic activity. In fact, if we think about economic activity broadly, there's really two fundamental determinants for what drives growth in the economy. The first is how productive are individual workers, and the second is how many people are working. So innovation, and in particular entrepreneurship, is a big driver of productivity. And then, of course, as we have more people enter the economy, that gives us a larger labor pool to then grow the economy by. So how do these things work out? What's the interplay between entrepreneurs and immigration? Well, starting with entrepreneurs, we know entrepreneurs are very important for innovation. They tend to be responsible for a large amount of patenting and other innovations that drive economic activity. They're important for job creation. So about 20% of jobs created each year in the economy on average come from companies that are just 1 or 2 years old, and the vast majority of the additional amount of job creation comes from companies that are less than 10 years old. So we know that there's this important part of entrepreneurship for driving innovation and economic growth. How does this relate to immigration? Well, it turns out that immigrants are more likely to be entrepreneurs than regular people just born in the US. In fact, they're about twice as likely, and in some states about 5 times as likely to be an entrepreneur as a domestically born citizen. And on top of this, they tend to start fairly successful companies. So about 20% of companies listed in the US right now are companies that were founded by immigrants. If we look at unicorns, so these highly valued new companies, about half of the unicorns had a founder or co-founder that was an immigrant, and about 75% of unicorns have an immigrant that was a CEO, CTO, or other senior technology person in that company. So we know that entrepreneurs are more likely to be immigrants. We also know that immigrant entrepreneurs are likely to be highly productive and successful. And we also know that they're likely to be very innovative. If we look at, say, patenting rates by immigrants, immigrants are more likely to have a patent than folks born in the US. And those patents are more likely to be valuable, things that are actually commercialized and used. So all of these things sort of line up to suggest that immigrants are a very important part of entrepreneurship and therefore economic growth in the US. So how does this relate back to policy? Well, you know, the current policies are quite restrictive in terms of how immigrants can become entrepreneurs in the United States compared to other countries. So we propose 3 particular types of policy changes that could promote immigrant entrepreneurship. The first one is what we call a startup visa. So a startup visa would be a visa that an entrepreneur could get if they satisfied certain criteria and were going to start a new company. So this could be, in particular, the type of investment that was going to be backing the new company so that we knew it was a credible claim to start a new company. But if you meet these criteria, then you can have a visa to set up your company in the US. This is quite important because other countries are doing this, and I think in today's global economy, it's much less a question of if a company is going to get started and much more likely just a question of where a company is going to get started. So we would much rather have those companies be in the US rather than Canada or Europe or somewhere in Asia, especially if it's someone that wants to live in the US. Another big issue has been H-1B visas. So H-1B visa program is quite controversial, and there's some evidence that it's been abused by certain firms in terms of providing labor to the tech industry in particular. Maybe not the tech companies themselves, but companies that then provide labor to those companies. So the question is, how do we actually have an H-1B visa program that, rather than, say, undercutting domestic workers' wages, is going to provide reliefs for the bottlenecks where we need more technology workers in certain companies. So one simple remedy for this wouldn't necessarily fit into the current H-1B visa program, but something that could be an extension or a new type of H-1B visa program would be to have an annual fee associated with the visa that perhaps depended on the type of job, the type of industry, and also varied cyclically. Or if that's a bit too clever, we might think about just having a sufficiently high cost to an H-1B so that we were not going to be undercutting domestic workers. And in other words, that it would almost always be the case that you would be better off hiring a domestic worker rather than paying the premium to bring in a foreign worker. So the last policy remedy that we suggest are STEM visas. So right now in the US, it's probably the best place in the world to go and get an education in STEM fields. Yet a lot of the people that come and get their education here in the US end up having to go back to their home country. And so we spend a lot of resources here in the US training these people, and then we're not able to benefit from the technical skills that we provide to them. So the idea behind a STEM visa was, well, if you come here, as long as you're working in a STEM field, that you would get a visa, and that a visa could eventually turn into a green card. It could be that immediately it turns into a green card. That's some of the more aggressive proposals, but it doesn't have to be that way. It could be that, for example, once you amass a certain cumulative amount of wages in a STEM profession, say $250,000 worth of STEM wages, then you qualify for a green card, so that we know we're getting economic value from these people that are staying in the country that we're spending so much effort and time training. So in conclusion, tying this all back to this notion of what drives fundamental economic activity, remember there's really just two things: how productive are workers and how many workers there are. And in both of these dimensions, immigrants really help us out. They tend to be more productive, more innovative, so they're helping drive labor productivity, and just by the virtue of being here, they're increasing the supply of labor. So overall, the economy should benefit.